It's no secret that with every new modification I do to my Rebel 1100, the club style influences become more and more apparent. And if you're not familiar with what club style is, the best way that I can describe it is just Sons of Anarchy, brother. And one of the signature kind of defining mods of any club style bike is the fact that it has taller handlebars, whether that's via risers, ape hangers, whatever. And up until now, that was really the only mod that I was missing on my Rebel to really make it club style. I had some little baby 1-inch risers previously, and I convinced myself that it was enough. And they're only 1-inch risers, but it makes so much of a difference. These did the trick perfect, but as the lie detector test determined,
that was a lie.
But if I'm being honest, lots of the reason why I convinced myself the little baby 1-inch risers were enough is because up until that point, nobody had put any legit risers on because there's a myriad of issues that kind of prevented it. But I quickly realized that those little teeny tiny risers were not enough, so I started researching, and over the past couple months, I figured out a way to put risers on my bike that I would actually be happy with given my criteria. And that criteria was it had to look stock, it had to be cheap and easy-ish, and it had to be reversible. So that if I didn't like the taller risers, which spoiler alert, I absolutely love them, but if I didn't like them, I would be able to reverse them. So that meant no drilling anything, no rewiring, nothing that couldn't be totally reversed. And I could not be more stoked to tell you guys that I figured out exactly how to do that, as you can see by my 6-inch risers right there, which I absolutely love. So today I'm going to show you guys exactly how I made it work and just how easy it is. And along the way, I'll tell you about all the problems with why this hasn't been done before and how I solved them. So, without further ado, let's jump straight into it. Make sure to subscribe if you're new here. Alright, now, I know I'm not at my house or at the garage, but fear not, inside my saddlebags I have all the accoutrement to properly show you guys exactly how I made this work. First things first, let's go ahead and pop this fairing off so you guys can get a better look at it. So let's take a look at everything that we're working with, and I gotta say, now that everything is figured out, it's super easy for you guys to do yourself. It's just the figuring it out part that was difficult. So we have our 6-inch rocks risers here. They're 6-inch risers, but it's actually only 4 inches taller than stock. I'll explain that in a second. And in order to make that work, we have our 13 centimeter, I think it was, brake line extension, and we have our 70 millimeter longer clutch cable there. And holding the speedometer on in the most stock position possible, we have a clamp right under there, and that's really all there is to it. That's all you have to buy in order to make this work is the risers, the hardware, brake line extension, clutch cable, and that clamp. So it seems nice and easy, but like I said, there are some issues that you run into along the way, so let me start taking out my accoutrement and explain that. Did I buy an entire stock triple tree just so that I could show you guys this? Yes, kind of, sort of, but also not really. Essentially, when I started looking for risers for this bike, what I quickly realized is that every single riser setup that I found, whether it was for Harleys, for other Rebels, they all had 1/2-inch hardware that came through. The pass-through of the stock triple tree is 12 millimeters, not a 1/2 inch. So in order to get any of the risers to work, your option was really that you just had to drill out the triple tree, and it's only 0.7 millimeters, but I really didn't want to have to drill it out because, like I said, I wanted everything reversible. And to solve that issue, I found this hardware right here, which we'll talk about in a second, but the reason why I bought this, honestly, is because I wanted to practice drilling it out because I kind of started feeling like my only option was doing that. So this is the stock riser setup, and this is what I meant by the fact that these are 6-inch risers, but they're actually only 4 inches taller than stock. As you can see, the stock risers are 2 inches, so you have to subtract 2 from whatever the risers are to get how much rise you actually get out of it. So that was stock, and then what I was running before was this setup here, the 1-inch risers. They're kind of like the Lego setup, as I like to call it. It definitely added a little bit of height to it, but honestly, over time, it didn't become super noticeable, and I still had a bunch of strain on my back, and that's when I realized I needed something taller. So the quote-unquote easy route, where is it, would have been an even bigger quote-unquote Lego riser setup like this one. These are 4-inch risers that also have a 1-inch pullback, and there's a guy on the Rebel Facebook group, Mike Barber, who actually did this exact setup, and I used lots of his pictures as reference for how I could make it work. But essentially, this would be the quote-unquote easiest option because you just put this like middle part that's just a bigger version of that in between your stock risers, and boom, you got a 4-inch rise and a 1-inch pullback, and you retain your stock clamp, which is how the speedometer mounts, which is another problem we ran into, but I'll talk about that in a second as well. So Mike showed that this would work, but if I gotta be honest with you guys, it's just not attractive, and I don't want these additional failure points, you know? You go from just 2 bolts to now you got 1 bolt down the middle, 1 bolt down the side, plus the 2 top bolts. So then I thought to myself, okay, I need a riser that works with the stock top clamp so that I can keep the speedometer in the stock location. And I ended up finding these risers from Steady Garage, which are actually for the Rebel 300 and 500, which happen to use the same exact top clamps. So I was like, okay, this is great. I can just use these. We'll retain the stock top clamps. That's hard to say. Say that 5 times fast. Stock top clamps, stock top clamps. Anyway, I'm like, this will be perfect. It's the rise that I want. These are 6-inch rise as well, and we can retain the stock top clamp. But then I quickly realized, oh, these are 1/2 inch just like all the other ones, so we would have to drill out the triple tree, which is why I bought that one off eBay to prepare myself for that. But in walked these adapters that I found that go from 1/2 inch to 12 millimeter. So I was like, okay, these are great. These adapters will, the 1/2 inch side will screw into those risers, and then the 12 millimeter will pass through the stock triple tree. But to my dismay, I quickly realized that wouldn't work because these are coarse thread and these are fine thread, so these would not thread into this. But I realized that the coarse thread on these is the same threading for any Harley riser. So that's when I realized that with these, I could use any Harley riser setup as long as I could figure out how to mount the speedometer. And I started kind of looking at the speedometer, and I'm like, I'm pretty sure I could just use some kind of clamp. I'm just going to risk it. I need to find the cheapest Harley risers that I can find to see if the risers actually in fact work. And that's when I found these. So these risers actually only cost me 25 bucks, and they're still billet aluminum just like all the other like Thrashin risers and all that are like 400 bucks. These are made by Rox risers, like the same ones, the same company that makes the pivoting risers that a lot of people use on the Rebel 1100. If you're not familiar with the pivoting risers, essentially you take the stock clamp and there's a riser that goes in that, and you can pivot it around, and then the handlebars lock into the new clamp. Again, I didn't like those because they just seemed janky and ugly and way more failure points, not only the additional bolts, but also like all the new rotation points and everything. Just not a fan of those at all. But Rox actually makes these risers for Harleys. They were normally $120, found them on sale for $25, and I went, okay, this is my sign. I'll just get these, see if they work, and they did. So all I had to do was take these adapter bolts, thread them into the risers, and then the risers just go in place. But unfortunately, like I said, the risers don't work with the stock top clamp, so I had to figure out a way to mount up the speedometer, and that's when I found this clamp right here. So this is designed for, I guess, like light bars on off-road trucks and stuff, but essentially I realized, like, hey, this part in the pictures looks like it doesn't stick up very far, so it'll probably end up around the same point as that. Like if it's clamped on, those should line up pretty well, and maybe I could just use 2 of them and thread it in like that. And that ended up not working out because there's these tabs on the bars that I didn't want to cut off or whatever, and other reasons, like it wouldn't clear that plug. But I quickly realized that I could just mount the clamp right in the middle, and that's when I found this extra little like adapter extension plate thing that I had, I think from the Navi's handguards, and I cut it out with the necessary holes on the side to mount to the stock speedometer, although I did have to cut off a piece of the bracket there that held on all the plugs and everything just so I had enough room, but it wasn't needed anyway. So I cut the bracket up, I painted it flat black to look all nice, mounted the clamp to that, and what do you know, that's how we got our pretty much stock mounting location. And not only that, but you could obviously rotate it as well so that you can pick the angle of the speedometer. So boom, we solved most of the issues. We found risers that would work with the hardware to make them work. We found a way to mount the speedometer, and now all we had to figure out was the wiring and making sure that everything was long enough for the stock routing like I wanted. And that's where I found this brake line extension from Handlebar. I think that's what the company is, and it's a 13 centimeter extension that you just put onto the stock brake line here, and you don't even have to bleed the brakes. I watched a video from them about it, and I didn't believe it, but I'll be damned, it worked. I didn't have to bleed anything, just a whole lot of time jiggling this and then holding it down and whatever, and you'd see the bubbles start coming up through the brake master cylinder, and eventually the bubbles stop and you have full brake pressure. But the nice thing is that even if you did need to bleed it, there's a bleeder valve right here that will just bleed the air out of here, because no air would get in here, it's a sealed line. So even if you did need to bleed it, you just bleed it there and you're good to go. And then for the clutch cable, people, like I said, that guy Mike Barber who did the other 4-inch rise, he did find a way to use the stock clutch cable, but it looked like it was pulled super tight and it didn't have the same stock routing. And it works, but I wanted like fully stock look. And I ended up finding this on japan.webike, I think is the website, or webike.japan, whatever, I'll link it below. And it's designed for the Rebel 1100, and it is 70 millimeters longer than stock and super easy to put on because it has all the same like bends as the stock one. So you literally just take the stock one off, route this one through, hook it back up, and you're good to go. Oh, and speaking of rerouting, I think some people at a higher rise have made the stock brake line work, but I think most of those people people were the ones who used the Rox pivoting risers that brought it more back than up, so they were able to just reroute the stock brake line behind the triple tree. Like, instead of coming this way, it came up through here. But I didn't want to do that for a couple reasons. For one, I wanted to retain the stock routing, but also I didn't think that it would reach because mine went more up than back. So I grabbed this just to be safe. So with those two things, that was the solution to all of our problems. We figured out the risers, we figured out how to mount them, we figured out how to mount the speedometer, and we figured out how to extend the clutch and the brake line and keep the stock routing. We were good to go, and then we just had to figure out the routing for all this wiring. Now, from the factory, all of these are underneath this little plate right here, and they're attached to the bracket that we had to cut off. These would not reach all the way up there, so we just had to kind of bundle them up and keep them as clean as possible down here. And then these right here are usually inside. Did I bring that? Yes. They're usually inside of this little box thing right there, but I took that off because, for one thing, I don't like the look of it, and also I think there was an issue where one of the wires wouldn't work if we kept that. But I also just think it looks cleaner without it, and I just wrapped it all in electrical tape to seal it up and make it look cleaner. And really, that's the only thing about this setup that, you know, I'm not a huge fan of, is all the wiring. But for real, there's nothing you can do with it other than just clean it up with some zip ties and kind of wad everything up right there so it looks as clean as possible. And I don't mind because I have the fairing that goes on there, so it blocks everything. But if you want to do this and you don't have the fairing, you could always just grab something. What do I have in here? A bag like this, handlebar bag, and it would just go over like that and cover everything, and then the wires would just go in between the risers like that, and nobody would be the wiser. How's it going? Oh, they got beers. Let me get one. But yeah, so that's the gist of it. That is kind of all the difficulties that I encountered along the way. But like I said, now that I have it figured out, it'll be super easy for you guys to do yourself. The simplified steps are, you just have to take all of the wires off of the bars by unclipping the little zip tie things here and taking all of these off of the bracket behind this. Some of mine were difficult, so I just stuck a screwdriver in there and broke it off because I know that it's not going to go back on. Then you just take the brake line off and add the extension, take the clutch cable off and add the new one, thread those adapters into the risers, put those through and tighten them on, make the little bracket for your clamp, attach the clamp to the speedometer and obviously attach it to the bars, figure out your positioning. Along the way, take off the little plastic cover here and clean everything up with electrical tape, tidy up the wires, and that's it. I don't think I missed any steps. So super simple once it's figured out. It was just the figuring out process that was a little tricky. Now, the thing to note is, like I said, these are the 6-inch risers, and for me, they seem to be the perfect height. They kind of like make it so that my arms stick not straight out from my chest, but pretty much straight out from my chest. And they also bring the bars closer back to me. They're not pullback risers, they're straight back risers. But since we know math, since we know that this bike has a 28-degree rake angle and these risers are 4 inches taller than stock, a little bit of math will tell us that it not only brings it up 4 inches, but also closer to the rider by almost 2 inches. So it's like perfect for me. Not only does it bring them up higher so that my arms are kind of coming out straight from my chest, but they're also close enough to me now that my arms still have a little bit of bend in them. So it's great. Super comfortable. Is there any accoutrement that I forgot to mention? Oh, right. This. Okay, that's important. I almost ended the video without pointing this out. So part of the routing, I didn't really show the wire routing too much, but pretty much everything goes in front of the risers except for the speedometer cable, because this is the only thing that's pretty tight. Typically this goes in front of the triple tree, but this is the only thing I had to route behind it so it could come up right there. And as you can see, that clamp like clears it perfectly. It's freaking great. But yeah, this is kind of tight. So if you go any taller, which by the way, I did get some 8-inch pullback risers right here. Same exact thing as these, just 2 inches taller and 1 inch back, just in case these weren't enough, but honestly, these are perfect. So if you want to go any taller than 6 inches and go with the 8-inch, or like my subscriber Nate did, he did some 10-inch risers. Damn you, Nate, getting to this before me, but thank you for lighting a fire under my ass to get mine done. He did 10-inch risers, and you can kind of tell from his pictures that they come up a lot higher than these, obviously, but it looks like the speedometer he had to mount in about the same place so that he didn't stretch this out or anything. But that's where this comes into play, which I will link below also. Shout out Mike Barber for discovering this. This is a plug-and-play extension that will plug into this right here and then also plug into the speedometer, and this is 7 inches long. So if you want to do risers taller than 6 inches, you can throw on this plug-and-play adapter, maybe wrap it up real nice and sexy with some electrical tape or whatever, and that will allow you to go like way, way higher. So Nate, this is what I was talking about in the forums. I'm sure this will solve all your problems. We will grab the fairing here, and like I said, even though it's not the sexiest because you have to have the wad of wires here, once you throw the fairing on, you can barely even tell. So I know that was a lot of yapping, but hopefully that helps you guys out and shows you exactly how how easy it is to do this yourself. I'll link everything you need in the description so you can pick it up for yourself. And yeah, hopefully you guys are as stoked on it as I am. Here's a little view of me riding it. Check that out, dude. I am so stoked on how this is. It's just, everything is great. I love it so much. Yeah, thanks for watching. Shout out to the Patreon members for making all of this possible, and honestly for supporting me over winter. And Patreon actually saw the entire process of this along the way. I gave them several updates, so they knew about this like a month, maybe 2 months ago, and you guys just found out. So if you want to support me in the biggest and best way possible, hit up patreon.com/lifeofburch. And other than that, make sure to like, comment, subscribe. We'll catch you on the next one whenever we get a freak 50-degree day again. Love you guys. Peace.
Oh, so basic. Hope you play this. Damn, I prayed it. Nice song, and I became this. Old souls fake it. Paid those placements. Fuck shit. And I'm still waiting on the brighter days. Been a minute, been rough many times more. And I'm kicking rocks to a sky of gray. Praying hard, talk to me before I'm done for.